The sound reached Zachary Owens before he even crested the ridge. A voice so pure and haunting it stopped him cold in the saddle, making his horse whinny and shake its mane as if the animal too had been touched by something otherworldly. He had been tracking strays for the better part of 3 days across the foothills near Oroville, California, in the scorching summer of 1878, and the merciless sun had baked his thoughts down to their simplest forms: water, shade, and getting those damned cattle back to the ranch before his boss fired him for incompetence. But now all of that evaporated like morning dew on hot stone, because that voice carried on the wind was singing something he had never heard before, words in a language that sounded like water running over smooth rocks, and it pulled at something deep in his chest that he had thought long dead. Zachary was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of hard work under the California sun, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in springtime. He had come west from Missouri 5 years ago after his parents died of fever, leaving him with nothing but a strong back and a stubborn refusal to quit when things got hard. The work suited him well enough, the solitude even more so, because talking to people meant opening up parts of himself he preferred to keep locked away. Women in town had tried to catch his attention, but he always deflected their interest with polite distance, never cruel but never encouraging either. He told himself he was content with his life as it was, that he needed nothing more than honest work and a place to lay his head at night. But that voice sang through all his defenses like they were made of paper. He urged his horse forward, moving through the tall grass and scattered oaks that dotted the landscape here where the valley met the foothills. The song grew louder as he approached, and he could see a meadow opening up ahead, thick with wildflowers that painted the ground in swaths of purple and gold. The grass grew knee-high in places, and a small creek wound through the center of it all, the water catching the afternoon light and throwing it back in brilliant flashes. The heat shimmered in waves across the open space, but the singing made it seem almost bearable, as if the sound itself carried some coolness with it. He dismounted at the edge of the tree line, tying his horse to a low branch, then moved forward on foot. His boots made almost no sound in the soft earth, and he found himself holding his breath as he pushed through the last screen of brush and finally saw her. She stood in the middle of the meadow, knee-deep in flowers and grass, her head tilted back toward the sky as she sang. Her hair fell in dark waves down her back, nearly to her waist, and her dress was simple but well made, a light blue cotton that moved gently in the breeze. She looked to be in her early 20s, with a face that held both strength and softness in equal measure. Her eyes were closed as she sang, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, and Zachary thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. He stood frozen, afraid to move and break whatever spell had been cast over this place. The song continued, rising and falling like the land itself, and he felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been sealed tight for too long. When she finally finished, the last note hanging in the air like a prayer, the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Then she opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Zachary felt his face flush hot with embarrassment at being caught watching her like some kind of fool, but he could not seem to make his feet move or his mouth form words of apology. She did not look frightened or angry, just curious, her head tilting slightly to one side as she regarded him with eyes that were the deepest brown he had ever seen. "I did not mean to intrude," he finally managed, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "I heard you singing, and I followed the sound. I apologize for startling you." She took a few steps closer, moving through the flowers with easy grace. "You did not startle me," she said, and her voice when she spoke was just as lovely as when she sang, touched with an accent he could not quite place. "I saw you coming before you reached the trees." "You did." "I have learned to be aware of my surroundings," she said simply. "A woman alone must be careful." Zachary nodded, understanding the truth of that all too well. The West could be brutal to anyone, but especially to women without protection. "Are you from around here? I have not seen you in town." "I live about 5 miles north, near the old Miller place," she said. "My father bought the property last year. We came from San Francisco." "That is quite a change," Zachary said, then felt stupid for stating the obvious. But she smiled, and it transformed her whole face, lighting it up from within. "Yes, it is, but I prefer it here. The city was too loud, too crowded. Here I can breathe." She gestured around at the meadow, at the wide open sky above them. "Here I can sing without people complaining about the noise." "Anyone who would complain about that voice does not deserve to hear it," Zachary said, then felt his face heat again at his own boldness. But she smiled wider, a hint of color rising in her own cheeks. "That is kind of you to say. I am Flora Richardson. Zachary Owens. Most people call me Zach." "It is nice to meet you, Zachary Owens." She said his full name deliberately, her eyes dancing with something that might have been amusement or challenge or both. "What brings you out here besides my singing?" "Tracking strays," he said, grateful for the change to more practical topics. "We lost about 15 head during the last storm, and they have been wandering these hills ever since. I found most of them, but there are still 3 or 4 out here somewhere." "I have seen some cattle," Flora said thoughtfully. "This morning, near the creek about a mile west of here. 4 of them, I think, with your ranch's brand." "You know the brand, the double barrow." "Yes, I have learned the local brands. My father likes to know who owns what around our property." She smiled again. "He is cautious by nature." Zachary felt relief wash through him at the thought of finally tracking down the last of the strays. "Could you show me where you saw them? I would be grateful for the help." Flora considered for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I can do that. Wait here while I get my horse." She walked past him toward another section of trees he had not noticed, and he watched her go with something like wonder still humming in his chest. A few minutes later she emerged leading a pretty chestnut mare, already saddled, and he realized she must have been planning to ride somewhere when she stopped to sing in the meadow. She swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, settling her skirts around her, and looked at him expectantly. "Lead on," he said, moving to retrieve his own horse. They rode together through the afternoon heat, following the meandering path of the creek westward. Flora rode well, he noticed, sitting easy in the saddle like someone who had spent considerable time on horseback. She pointed out landmarks as they went, showing him places she had discovered in her explorations of the area, and he found himself talking more freely than he had in months. She had a way of asking questions that did not feel intrusive, that made him want to share things he normally kept private. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents and their small farm, about the fever that took them both within a week of each other. He told her about coming west with nothing but what he could carry, about taking work where he could find it, until he landed at the Double Barrow Ranch 3 years ago. She listened without interrupting, her face showing genuine interest and sympathy, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "That must have been very difficult," she said softly, "losing them both like that so quickly." "It was a long time ago," Zachary said, but even as he said it he knew it was not really true. The pain had dulled, but it had never truly gone away. "Some wounds do not heal just because time passes," Flora said, and there was something in her voice that made him look at her more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." She nodded slowly. My mother died 2 years ago. Consumption. It took her slowly, over the course of a year, and by the end she was so thin and pale I could barely recognize her. Her voice remained steady, but her hands tightened slightly on the reins. My father could not bear to stay in the city after she was gone. Too many memories. So he sold his business and we moved out here to start fresh. I am sorry, Zachary said, and meant it deeply. Thank you. It helps to be here, in a place she never saw. It makes it easier to remember her as she was before she got sick, when she was strong and full of life. Flora looked out across the landscape, her eyes distant. She used to sing to me when I was little. That is where I learned most of the songs I know. They rode in comfortable silence for a while after that, bound together by their shared understanding of loss. The sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, and Zachary found himself wishing the ride could last longer, even though he knew he needed to find those cattle before dark. As if sensing his thoughts, Flora pointed ahead. There, by that stand of willows. Do you see them? Zachary shaded his eyes and spotted the 4 steers grazing peacefully near the water. Relief and disappointment warred in his chest. Relief because his job was done, disappointment because it meant no more excuse to spend time with Flora Richardson. I see them. Thank you for your help. I would have been searching until nightfall otherwise. It was no trouble, Flora said, then hesitated before continuing. Will you be coming back this way again? Zachary's heart jumped at the question, at what it might imply. I could be. The strays like this area, so I have to check it regularly. Perhaps I will see you again then. I come to that meadow often to practice my singing. She met his eyes directly, and he saw something there that matched the feeling growing in his own chest. It would be nice to have someone to talk to besides my father and our housekeeper. I would like that very much, Zachary said, trying to keep the eagerness out of his voice and probably failing. Flora smiled, that brilliant transforming smile again, and Zachary felt something settle into place inside him, like a puzzle piece finally finding its proper spot. Good. Then I will see you soon, Zachary Owens. She turned her horse and rode away before he could respond, leaving him sitting in his saddle watching her go until she disappeared behind a rise in the land. Then he turned his attention to the cattle, gathering them with practiced skill, but his mind remained fixed on Flora Richardson and the sound of her voice singing in the meadow. Over the next 2 weeks, Zachary found reasons to ride out toward that meadow more often than was strictly necessary. He told himself he was being thorough, checking the range carefully, making sure no more cattle had strayed. But the truth was he was hoping to see Flora again, to hear her sing, to talk with her the way they had during their first meeting. And more often than not she was there, sometimes singing, sometimes just sitting by the creek reading a book, always seeming unsurprised when he appeared. They fell into an easy companionship, meeting several times a week in the late afternoon when his work was done, and before she needed to return home for supper. She told him about her life in San Francisco, about the boarding school she had attended, about her love of music and literature. He told her about ranch work, about the cattle and horses, about the hard beauty of the land. They talked about everything and nothing, and Zachary felt himself opening up in ways he never had before, felt walls he had carefully constructed beginning to crumble. He was falling in love with her. He realized one evening as he watched her laugh at something he said, her whole face alight with joy. The knowledge should have terrified him, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as inevitable as water running downhill. He wanted to tell her but held back, afraid of moving too fast, afraid of ruining what they had built. But one afternoon in early August, when the heat hung over everything like a blanket, and the cicadas sang their endless summer song. Flora brought up something that changed the easy flow of their relationship. "My father wants to meet you," she said without preamble as Zachary dismounted near their usual meeting spot by the creek. He froze in the act of tying his horse. "He does?" "Yes. He has noticed I have been coming out here more often, and when I told him I had made a friend, he insisted on meeting you properly." Flora's expression was neutral, but Zachary could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "He is very protective since my mother died. I am all he has left." "I understand that," Zachary said slowly, trying to organize his thoughts. "But what exactly have you told him about me? The truth? That you are a cowboy who works for the double bar, that you have been kind and respectful, that I enjoy your company." She paused, then added quietly, "that you are important to me." Zachary's heart kicked hard in his chest at those words. "You are important to me too, Flora, more important than I know how to say." She smiled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Then you will come to dinner." "Tomorrow evening?" "Yes," Zachary said without hesitation. "Yes, of course I will." The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Zachary did his work in a distracted haze, earning himself a sharp word from the ranch foreman when he let a gate stand open that should have been closed. He apologized and forced himself to focus, but his mind kept drifting to the evening ahead, to meeting Flora's father, to what that might mean for their future. He took extra care getting cleaned up that evening, washing thoroughly in the creek behind the bunkhouse, putting on his best shirt and pants, even attempting to tame his unruly hair with water and determination. The other ranch hands gave him grief about it, asking who the lucky lady was, and he deflected their questions with good-natured stubbornness. This thing between him and Flora still felt too new, too precious to share with others yet. He rode north as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, following Flora's directions to the old Miller place. He had never been out this way before, and he was impressed when the house came into view. It was substantial, a two-story structure painted white with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. The land around it looked well-maintained, with a neat barn and several outbuildings arranged in a functional layout. Clearly, Flora's father had invested significantly in fixing up the property. Flora must have been watching for him because she appeared on the porch before he could even dismount. She wore a dress he had not seen before, a deep green that brought out the warm tones in her skin and hair, and she looked nervous in a way he had never seen her before. "You came," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "Of course I came," Zachary replied, tying his horse to the hitching post and climbing the porch steps. "Are you all right?" "Just nervous," Flora admitted. "My father can be intimidating when he wants to be." Before Zachary could respond, the front door opened and a man stepped out. Francis Richardson was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that took in every detail of Zachary's appearance in one sweeping glance. He wore the kind of clothes that spoke of money and city life, though they had been adapted somewhat to country living. His expression was neutral but not unfriendly as he extended a hand. "You must be Zachary Owens. I am Francis Richardson. Please, come inside." Zachary shook the offered hand, meeting the older man's eyes directly. "Thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate the invitation." Inside, the house was comfortably furnished without being ostentatious. The front room held a sofa, and several chairs arranged around a fireplace, with bookshelves lining one wall and photographs in frames scattered on various surfaces. Through a doorway, Zachary could see a dining table already set for three. An older woman appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Dinner is ready whenever you are, Mr. Richardson." "Thank you, Josephine. We will eat now." Francis gestured toward the dining room. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Owens." The meal that followed was excellent, but Zachary barely tasted it, too focused on navigating the conversation with Flora's father. Francis asked questions about his background, his work, his prospects, all delivered in a polite but probing tone that made it clear this was as much an interrogation as a dinner. Zachary answered honestly, not trying to make himself sound better than he was but not underselling himself either. He had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Flora participated less than usual, watching the exchange between her father and Zachary with worried eyes. But as the meal progressed and Francis seemed to relax slightly, some of the tension eased from her posture. "Flora tells me you have been meeting regularly for several weeks now," Francis said as Josephine cleared away the dinner plates and brought out coffee. "Yes, sir, we have become friends." "Just friends?" Francis's gaze was sharp and direct. Zachary felt his face heat, but he held the older man's eyes. "I care for your daughter very much, sir. More than friends, if I am being honest, but I have been respectful of her reputation and her wishes." "I should hope so," Francis said, but there was a hint of approval in his voice now. "Flora is all I have left in this world, Mr. Owens. I will not see her hurt or taken advantage of." "I would never hurt her," Zachary said with complete sincerity. "She is the most remarkable person I have ever met." Francis studied him for a long moment, then glanced at his daughter. Flora was looking at Zachary with such open affection that it made his breath catch. When Francis spoke again, his voice had softened slightly. "I can see that you care for each other, but you must understand my position. I need to know that any man who courts my daughter can provide for her properly. What are your plans for the future, Mr. Owens? Do you intend to work as a ranch hand indefinitely?" Zachary had expected this question and had thought carefully about his answer. "No, sir. I have been saving my wages for 3 years now with the goal of eventually buying my own land. I am not there yet, but I am getting closer. I have about $500 put away, and the foreman at the Double Bar O has told me he will help me find a good piece of property when I am ready." $500 is a respectable sum, Francis acknowledged, but land is expensive and starting a ranch requires significant capital beyond just the purchase price. "I know that, sir. I am not rushing into anything. I want to do it right." Zachary paused, then added, "But I also know that I would work every day for the rest of my life to give your daughter the life she deserves." Flora made a small sound that might have been a suppressed sob or laugh. Zachary could not tell which. Francis looked at her again, then back at Zachary, and something in his expression shifted. "Very well," he said finally. "I can see you are sincere, and Flora clearly has strong feelings for you. I will not stand in the way of you courting her properly, but I do have conditions." "Name them," Zachary said immediately. "You will visit here at the house, where Josephine or I can act as chaperone. I will not have Flora's reputation compromised by clandestine meetings in Meadows." He held up a hand when Zachary started to protest. "I am not accusing you of impropriety, but people talk, and a young woman's reputation is a fragile thing. You may call on her 3 evenings a week, and you may take her for supervised outings on Sundays after church if she wishes. Beyond that, you will focus on your work and building your savings so that when you do ask for her hand, you can support her as she deserves." The casual mention of asking for her hand made Zachary's heart skip, but he nodded seriously. "I agree to your conditions, sir." "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Do not thank me yet," Francis said dryly. "I am doing this for Flora, not for you, but I admit you have made a better impression than I expected." He stood, signaling the end of the evening. "It is getting late. Flora will see you out." On the porch, away from her father's watchful eyes, Flora grabbed both of Zachary's hands in hers. I am sorry he was so stern. He means well, he is just worried about me. He loves you, Zachary said. I cannot fault him for that, and his conditions are reasonable. I want to do this properly anyway. So you will come back? Flora asked, and he heard the vulnerability beneath the question. Every chance I get, Zachary promised. Flora, I meant what I said in there. I care for you more than I have ever cared for anyone. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. Flora's eyes shone in the lamplight spilling from the windows. I feel the same way. From the moment I saw you standing at the edge of that meadow, something in my heart recognized you. I know that sounds foolish. It does not sound foolish at all, Zachary said softly. He lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I will see you soon. The following months fell into a pattern that was both sweet and frustrating. Zachary visited the Richardson house 3 times a week as arranged, spending evenings in the front room talking with Flora, while her father or Josephine sat nearby doing their own work, but always present. On Sundays, he attended church with them, sitting in the pew behind the Richardsons and trying not to be too obvious about watching the back of Flora's head. After services, they would walk together, sometimes around town, sometimes out into the countryside with either Frances or Josephine trailing at a discreet distance. It was not the same as their earlier meetings in the meadow, that freedom and privacy they had enjoyed before, but Zachary found joy in it anyway. Every moment with Flora was precious, whether they were discussing books she had been reading, or he was telling her stories about his work, or they were simply sitting in comfortable silence. He learned her expressions, her moods, the way her eyes lit up when she was excited about something. He learned that she hummed when she was thinking, that she had a quick temper but it never lasted long, that she loved thunderstorms and hated spiders. And slowly, carefully, he told her he loved her. It was a Sunday afternoon in late October, the air finally starting to cool after the long, hot summer. They were walking along the creek, the same one that ran through the meadow where they had first met, with Josephine following about 30 yards behind. The leaves on the few deciduous trees were turning gold and red, and the light had that particular quality of autumn, sharp and clear. I have been thinking about something, Zachary said, his heart pounding. What is that? Flora asked, looking up at him with those dark eyes that still made his breath catch. About the future, about what I want from life. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Flora, I love you. I have loved you for months now, probably since the first moment I heard you singing. You have become the center of everything for me, the reason I work so hard, the reason I can imagine a future that is about more than just surviving day to day. Flora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I love you too, Zachary. So much it frightens me sometimes. Frightens you how? Because loving someone means you can lose them, she said quietly. I lost my mother, and it nearly destroyed my father and me both. The thought of losing you is terrifying. Zachary reached out and took her hands in his, wishing they were somewhere private so he could pull her into his arms. I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen to me. Life is uncertain, especially out here, but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to stay safe, to come home to you every day. And I can promise that I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. That is all I can ask for, Flora said, tears spilling over now. When will you talk to my father? Soon, Zachary promised. I want to have a bit more saved, enough to make a real start on our life together. By spring, I should have enough to buy land and start building. Would you be willing to wait that long? I would wait forever if I had to, Flora said simply, but I am glad I do not have to. They stood there by the creek, hands clasped, speaking vows to each other that were as binding as any ceremony, while Josephine pretended not to watch from her respectful distance. And the autumn wind carried the promise of change. Zachary threw himself into work with renewed purpose after that. He took on extra jobs around the ranch, anything that would add to his savings. He repaired fences, broke horses, helped with the endless tasks that running a large cattle operation required. The foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Dan McCready, noticed his increased dedication and took him aside one day in November. "I hear you are planning to propose to the Richardson girl come spring," Dan said without preamble. Zachary was learning that nothing stayed private for long in a small community, but he was still surprised. News travels fast. Always does. "She is a good girl from what I hear. Pretty too." "She is remarkable," Zachary said firmly. Dan smiled, a rare softening of his usually stern features. "I am glad to hear it. A good woman makes all the difference in a man's life. Now about that land you are looking to buy. I have been keeping my ear to the ground like I promised, and I heard something interesting yesterday." Zachary straightened, suddenly alert. "What did you hear?" "Old Tom Bennett, who has that piece of property bordering the Richardson land to the east, is thinking about selling. His arthritis has gotten so bad he can barely work anymore, and his son moved to Sacramento and has no interest in ranching. Tom mentioned he would be looking for a buyer come spring." Zachary's mind raced. Land bordering the Richardson property would be perfect, allowing him and Flora to stay close to her father while still having their own place. "How much land are we talking about?" "About 200 acres, with a small house and barn already on the property. The structures need work, but they are sound. He is asking $800. Zachary did some quick mental calculations. He had just over $600 saved now. If he kept up his current pace, adding his regular wages plus the extra work, he could have the full amount by April, maybe March if he was lucky and picked up enough additional jobs. Do you think he would hold it for me if I put down a deposit?" "I think he might, especially if I put in a good word. Tom is a friend, and he would rather sell to someone he knows will work the land properly than just take the highest offer from a stranger." Dan studied him seriously. "This is a big step, son. Are you sure you are ready for it?" "I have never been more sure of anything," Zachary said without hesitation. "All right then. I will talk to Tom, see if we can work something out. But you better be ready to work your tail off these next few months, because owning land is one thing, making it profitable is another entirely." "I am ready," Zachary promised. He told Flora about the opportunity that next Sunday, and her excitement matched his own. They stood in her father's front room, keeping a proper distance with Francis reading in a nearby chair, and spoke in low voices about the future they were building together. 200 acres, Flora breathed, her eyes shining. "That is enough to run cattle and have room for horses too, maybe even a garden near the house." "I was thinking the same thing," Zachary said, loving the way she immediately began planning, seeing the possibilities. "The house needs work, but it has good bones, according to Dan. We could fix it up, make it into a real home." "I want to see it," Flora said immediately. "It is not mine yet," Zachary cautioned, but he was smiling. "I need to come up with the full purchase price first, and that will take another few months. But once the deal is done, I will take you there, show you everything." From his chair, Francis cleared his throat. "This Bennett property you are discussing, I know the land. It is good grazing with a reliable water source and decent timber. If you can buy it for $800, that is a fair price." Zachary turned to face the older man. "I hope to have the money by early spring, sir. And when I do, I intend to ask formally for your daughter's hand." Francis set down his book, regarding Zachary with those sharp blue eyes. "You have proven yourself to be a hard worker and a man of your word over these past months. More importantly, My daughter is happier than I have seen her since before her mother passed. When you are ready to ask, I am prepared to give you my blessing." Flora made a small sound of joy and crossed the room to hug her father, ignoring propriety entirely. Zachary felt a rush of gratitude and relief so strong it nearly knocked him sideways. He had known he needed Frances's approval, but having it stated so clearly removed a weight he had been carrying without fully realizing it. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will do everything in my power to make her happy." "See that you do," Frances said, but his tone was warm. "Now, I believe Josephine made apple cake for dessert. We should probably eat it before it gets cold." The winter passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Zachary drove himself hard, taking every opportunity to earn extra money. He helped neighbors with various projects, worked long hours at the ranch, and carefully added every penny to his savings. By February, he had enough for a deposit on the Bennett property, and Dan helped him negotiate terms with the old rancher. Tom Bennett agreed to hold the land until April 1st, giving Zachary time to raise the remaining $200 he needed. The deadline motivated him even more. He worked through cold rain and occasional snow, through days when his muscles screamed and his hands were so chapped they cracked and bled. But every time he felt like giving up, he thought of Flora, of the life they were going to build together, and it gave him the strength to keep going. He saw her less during those months, simply because he was working so much, but she never complained. She understood what he was doing and why, and on the Sundays when he could visit, she would tend to his roughened hands with gentle care, rubbing salve into the worst of the cracks and telling him about her own preparations. She had been sewing, she told him, making curtains and quilts for their future home. Her father had given her money to buy fabric and other household necessities, building up a hope chest full of things they would need when they were married. "I cannot wait to see it all in place," she told him one February afternoon. They were sitting in the Richardson parlor, closer together than propriety strictly allowed, holding hands where her father could not see. "I have been picturing how we will arrange everything, where each piece will go." "We could put your piano in the front room," Zachary suggested. Frances had given Flora a piano for Christmas, a beautiful upright that must have cost a small fortune to transport from Sacramento. Flora played it almost every day now, and Zachary loved listening to her. "Do you think the house is big enough for it?" Flora asked doubtfully. "We will make room," Zachary promised. "Your music is important and I want you to have it in our home." She squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you so much." "I love you too," he said softly. "Just a few more months and we can start our life together." But February turned into March, and a complication arose that Zachary had not anticipated. A group of cattle rustlers had been operating in the area, hitting several ranches including the Double Bar O. The ranch lost nearly 50 head of cattle in one night, and the owner was furious. He demanded that his men spend extra time patrolling the range, watching for any sign of the thieves. Zachary found himself pulling night watches in addition to his regular day work, which meant less sleep and less opportunity for extra jobs that would add to his savings. By mid-March, he was exhausted and still short of his goal by almost $100. The April 1st deadline loomed over him like a thundercloud, and he began to worry that he would not make it, that all his work would be for nothing. He was in town one Saturday afternoon, picking up supplies for the ranch, when he ran into Flora Richardson outside the general store. The older man took one look at Zachary's haggard face and frowned. "You look terrible, son. When was the last time you slept properly?" "I am fine," Zachary said automatically, then swayed slightly on his feet, betraying his words. Francis grabbed his arm to steady him. "You are not fine. Come with me." He steered Zachary down the street to the small cafe and ordered coffee and food, ignoring Zachary's protests that he needed to get back to the ranch. When the food arrived, Francis pushed the plate toward him. "Eat. Then we are going to talk." Zachary was too tired to argue, and the food did help, putting some strength back into his limbs. When he finished, Francis leaned back in his chair and studied him seriously. "Flora told me about the deadline for the Bennett property. She also told me you are still short of the full amount." "I will make it," Zachary said stubbornly. "I have 2 more weeks." "At what cost?" Francis asked quietly. "You are running yourself into the ground. That does my daughter no good if you collapse from exhaustion before you can even propose." "I do not have a choice," Zachary said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I cannot ask her to marry me if I do not have a way to provide for her properly. I need that land." Francis was silent for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out 5 $20 bills and laid them on the table between them. "No," Zachary said immediately, pushing the money back. "Thank you, sir, but I cannot accept that. I need to do this myself." "Why?" Francis asked simply. "Because of pride." "Because I need to prove I can take care of her," Zachary said. "I need to know I am good enough for your daughter." "You have already proven that," Francis said firmly. "You have worked yourself nearly to death trying to build a future for her. You have been respectful and patient and honorable in every way, but you are still thinking like a single man, Zachary. When you marry Flora, you will not be alone anymore. You will be part of a family, and families help each other." "But I do not want to be a burden or a charity case," Zachary protested weakly. "This is not charity. Consider it a loan if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back over time once the ranch is established. Or consider it an early wedding gift, my contribution to setting you and Flora up for success." Francis pushed the money back across the table. "I am not doing this just for you. I am doing it for my daughter, because she loves you and I can see that you make her happy. And I am doing it because I like you, son, and I want to see you succeed. Let me help." Zachary stared at the money, his vision blurring with tears he was too tired to hold back. Everything in him rebelled against accepting help, against admitting he could not do it all alone. But another part of him, the part that was learning what it meant to be loved and to love in return, recognized the truth in Francis's words. He would not be alone anymore. He would have Flora and through her, a family again. "I will pay you back," he said finally, his voice rough. "Every penny." "I know you will," Francis said. "Now take the money and go close the deal with Tom Bennett before you fall asleep in your soup." The transaction with Tom Bennett went smoothly once Zachary had the full purchase price. The old rancher was pleased to sell to someone he knew would care for the land, and by the end of March, Zachary held the deed to his own 200 acres. The reality of it did not fully hit him until he rode out to survey his property for the first time as its actual owner. The house sat on a small rise overlooking a creek, surrounded by rolling hills perfect for grazing cattle. It was small, just 4 rooms plus a loft, but it was solidly built with a good stone foundation and a newer roof. The barn was in decent shape too, large enough for several horses and with room for storing hay and equipment. The land itself was exactly as Dan had described, with good grass, reliable water, and enough timber along the creek to provide firewood and material for repairs. Standing on his own front porch, looking out across his own land, Zachary felt something shift inside his chest. He had been adrift for so long, moving from place to place with no real roots, working for other people's dreams instead of his own. But now, finally, he had something that was his, a foundation to build a life on. And more importantly, he had someone to share it with. He rode back to town that afternoon and stopped at the jeweler's shop, a small establishment run by a German immigrant named Herr Schneider. The jeweler had a modest selection of rings, and Zachary spent a long time looking through them before selecting one with a small diamond set in a simple gold band. It cost him $40, a significant portion of what remained of his savings, but when he imagined it on Flora's hand, he knew it was the right choice. The ring safely tucked in his pocket, he rode out to the Richardson house. It was a Tuesday evening, one of his regular visiting days, but this time he had asked Francis ahead of time if he could speak with him privately before seeing Flora. The older man was waiting on the porch when Zachary arrived, his expression giving nothing away. "Sir, I would like to formally ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," Zachary said without preamble. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "I love her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I own land now, 200 good acres, and I have enough saved to buy cattle and get started building a herd. I know I am not wealthy, and I know I cannot give her all the luxuries she might have had if she had stayed in San Francisco. But I swear to you that I will work every day to make her happy, to build a good life for us, to be the kind of husband she deserves." Francis looked at him for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I told you months ago that I would give my blessing when you were ready. You have more than earned it. Ask her, and I hope she says yes, though I think we both know what her answer will be." Relief flooded through Zachary so powerfully he felt light-headed. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Go on inside," Francis said, clapping him on the shoulder. "She is in the front room pretending to read. I will make myself scarce." Flora looked up when Zachary entered, and he saw immediately that she knew something was different. She set her book aside and stood, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Zachary, is everything all right?" He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "Everything is perfect. Flora, I closed the deal on the Bennett property. The land is mine now, ours if you will have it. I spoke with your father, and he has given his blessing." He sank down on one knee, pulling the ring from his pocket with shaking hands. "Flora Richardson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, build a life with me, grow old with me? I promise I will love you and cherish you for all my days." Flora was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, the most radiant smile he had ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Zachary, of course I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and finally pulled her into his arms the way he had been dreaming of for months. She came willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck, and when he kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise, he felt like he had finally come home. They set the wedding date for late May, giving them 2 months to prepare. Flora threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, working with Josephine to organize everything. She wanted a simple ceremony in the small church in Oroville, followed by a reception at her father's house. Zachary was happy to let her make most of the decisions, more focused on getting the house ready for them to move into. He spent every spare moment working on the property, repairing fences, fixing up the interior of the house, painting and cleaning until everything gleamed. Dan and some of the other ranch hands helped when they could, and Francis surprised him by showing up several times with tools and materials, working alongside him to build new furniture and make improvements. "You are good for my daughter," Francis said one afternoon as they worked together on constructing a new kitchen table. "I see the way she lights up when she talks about you, about the future you are building together. It reminds me of how her mother used to look at me. I hope I can make her even half as happy as you and your wife were," Zachary said honestly. "You already do," Frances replied, "and you will only get better at it with practice. Marriage is not always easy, but when you have the right partner, it is the best thing in life." As the wedding approached, Zachary found himself feeling nervous in a way he never had before. Not about marrying Flora, he had never been more certain of anything, but about being a good husband, about living up to her expectations and her trust. He confessed these fears to Dan one evening as they rode the range together. The older man chuckled. "Every man feels that way before he gets married if he has any sense at all. But here is the secret. You just do your best, every day. You show up, you work hard, you tell her you love her, and you listen when she talks. You will make mistakes, everyone does, but if you love each other and you are both willing to forgive and keep trying, you will be all right." "Is that how it was for you?" Zachary asked. He knew Dan had been married once, though his wife had died many years ago. "That is how it was for me," Dan confirmed. "And I would not trade those years with my Mary for anything in the world, even knowing how much it hurt to lose her." Loving someone is always a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the May sun turning everything golden. Zachary stood at the front of the church in his new suit, his hands sweating despite the relatively cool air inside the building. Dan stood beside him as his best man, offering quiet support, while the small church filled with people from the ranch, from town, neighbors and friends who had come to witness the ceremony. Then the music began, and Flora appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm, and Zachary forgot how to breathe. She wore a dress of ivory silk that her father had ordered specially from San Francisco, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Her dark hair was styled elegantly, with small flowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning. But it was her face that captured him completely, radiant with joy and love and anticipation. Her eyes locked on his as she walked down the aisle toward him. Frances placed her hand in Zachary's, his own eyes suspiciously bright, then stepped back to take his seat. The preacher began speaking, the familiar words of the ceremony washing over them, but Zachary was only half aware of what was being said. His entire focus was on Flora, on the feel of her hand in his, on the way she was looking at him like he was the answer to every prayer she had ever spoken. When it came time for the vows, his voice was strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. Flora's voice wavered with emotion but never faltered as she made the same promises back to him. They exchanged rings, the one he had given her when he proposed and a simple gold band she had chosen for him, symbols of the commitment they were making. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said finally. "You may kiss your bride." Zachary cupped Flora's face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks, and kissed her tenderly while their friends and neighbors applauded. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling through tears, overwhelmed by the reality of what they had just done. They were married. They belonged to each other now, bound by law and love and promises made before God and community. The reception at the Richardson house was a joyful affair, with food and music and dancing that went on into the evening. Zachary danced with his wife, the words still feeling strange and wonderful in his mind, holding her close and reveling in the fact that he could do so openly now. Flora laughed and smiled, greeting guests and accepting congratulations, but he could see the anticipation in her eyes that matched his own. They were both eager to leave, to begin their new life together in the home that was now truly theirs. Finally, as the sun began to set, they said their goodbyes. Flora hugged her father tightly, both of them crying again, and Frances embraced Zachary as well. "Take care of her," he said quietly. "With my life," Zachary promised. They rode together through the twilight toward their property, Flora's trunk of belongings strapped behind Zachary's saddle. When the house came into view, Zachary stopped his horse. "Before we go in, there is something I want to do," he said, dismounting and reaching up to help Flora down. "What is that?" she asked, laughing. "This," he said, and swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the house despite her surprised squeal. He carried her across the threshold the traditional way, setting her down gently in the middle of the front room, and they stood there together, taking in their new home. Flora had been out to see the property several times during the preparation period, helping Zachary clean and organize, hanging the curtains she had sewn. But this was different. This was them, alone in their own space, with no chaperones, no need to maintain proper distance. This was the beginning of their real life together. "It is perfect," Flora whispered, turning in a slow circle. "Everything is perfect." "Not quite everything," Zachary said. "We are missing the piano. Your father and I are planning to move it out here next week." Flora turned to him, eyes shining. "You really want to make room for it?" "Of course I do. Your music is part of who you are. Our home would not be complete without it." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Besides, I want to hear you sing every day for the rest of our lives." She reached up to cup his face, her touch infinitely gentle. "I love you, Zachary Owens." "I love you too, Flora Owens," he said, testing out her new name and loving the sound of it. Then he kissed her, slow and deep, and let her lead him toward their bedroom, toward the life they would build together in this house on this land, filled with work and hope and endless love. The first year of marriage was both harder and more wonderful than either of them had anticipated. Zachary worked from dawn until well past dark most days, building up the ranch from nothing. He bought 10 head of cattle with the last of his savings, a small start but a start nonetheless. He repaired fences, cleared brush, broke horses to sell for extra income. Flora worked just as hard, tending a large garden, preserving food for the winter, keeping the house clean and welcoming. They had little money for luxuries, and some months they scraped by on very little, but they were happy. On Sundays they rested, spending the day together without work intruding. Sometimes they rode out to the meadow where they had first met, and Flora would sing for him the way she had that first day. Sometimes they simply stayed home, reading together or talking about their dreams for the future. Those quiet moments were precious, a chance to reconnect after the hard work of the week. Francis visited regularly, usually bringing supplies or something he claimed to no longer need that somehow was exactly what they needed. Zachary suspected the older man was still helping them financially in subtle ways, but he had learned to accept it with grace. Flora's happiness was clearly important to Francis, and making sure they had what they needed was his way of showing love. As winter approached and the work outside became more difficult, Zachary spent more time on indoor projects. He built shelves for Flora's books, a proper desk where she could write letters, additional furniture to make the house more comfortable. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, Flora playing her piano, which now had pride of place in the front room, while Zachary repaired tack or whittled small items to sell in town. "I have been thinking," Flora said one evening in December as they sat together after supper. "We have been married 7 months now, and I could not be happier, but I have been wondering when we might start thinking about expanding our family." Zachary set down the leather strap he had been mending and looked at her carefully. "Are you saying you want to have a baby?" "I am saying I want us to have children," Flora corrected gently. "Not right this moment necessarily, but I wanted to know how you felt about it. We have never really discussed it." Zachary thought about it, imagining Flora pregnant, imagining a child in this house, and found that the idea filled him with warmth rather than fear. "I would love to have children with you," he said honestly. "I always imagined having a family someday. I just never knew who I would have it with until I met you." Flora smiled, moving closer to lean against his side. "Good, because I have been hoping you would say that. Are you?" He started, then stopped, not quite sure how to ask. "No, not yet," she said, understanding his unspoken question. "But maybe soon." They made love that night with new tenderness, the possibility of creating a life together adding another layer of meaning to their physical union. And 2 months later, Flora came to him with tears in her eyes and joy in her voice to tell him she was pregnant. Zachary swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if repetition would make it more real. "We are going to be parents." "Yes, we are," Flora said, cupping his face. "In late August or early September, the doctor thinks." The pregnancy was not easy. Flora suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Zachary felt helpless watching her struggle. He tried to take on more of the household work to ease her burden, though his own workload on the ranch never lessened. Francis became a more frequent visitor, bringing special foods that might tempt Flora's appetite and helping with heavier chores. As Flora's belly swelled with their child, Zachary found himself filled with a mixture of awe and terror. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Flora sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They talked about names endlessly, settling on Benjamin for a boy and Lily for a girl, though they changed their minds a dozen times. The baby came on a sweltering August evening, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Zachary had been out checking on the cattle when he heard Flora calling for him, her voice tight with pain. He rode back to the house faster than he ever had, arriving to find her doubled over in the kitchen, gripping the table edge. "The baby is coming," she gasped. "It is too early." Zachary helped her to their bedroom, then rode at a breakneck pace to fetch the doctor from town. The next 12 hours were the longest of his life, pacing outside the bedroom door while the doctor and Josephine, who Francis had sent over, tended to Flora. Her screams of pain tore through him, making him want to break down the door and do something, anything, to help her. But there was nothing he could do except wait and pray. Finally, as dawn broke over the hills, he heard a new sound, the thin, reedy cry of a baby. The door opened and Josephine appeared, smiling despite her exhaustion. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy, and your wife is fine." "She is tired, but fine." Zachary pushed past her into the room, his eyes going immediately to the bed where Flora lay propped against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling as she looked down at the baby in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachary crossed to the bed on shaking legs, looking down at the tiny red face visible above the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed too large for his small face. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and Zachary felt something crack open in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate it took his breath away. "He is beautiful," Zachary whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect, Flora. We made him," Flora said wonderingly. "We made this person together." They named him Benjamin Zachary Owens, and he became the center of their universe. Those first weeks were exhausting, the baby waking every few hours to eat, demanding constant attention. Zachary continued working the ranch but took on fewer hours, wanting to be close to home to help Flora. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night, and fell more deeply in love with both his wife and his son every single day. Francis was a devoted grandfather, visiting several times a week to hold his grandson and help with whatever needed doing. "He looks like you did at that age," he told Flora one afternoon, cradling Benjamin gently. "Same dark hair, same serious expression." "I hope he has Zachary's temperament," Flora said. "I was a fussy baby according to Mother." "You were perfect," Francis said firmly, then smiled down at the baby. "And so is this little one." As Benjamin grew, changing from a tiny newborn to a chubby, alert infant, the ranch began to prosper as well. Zachary's hard work was paying off, the cattle herd growing, the land producing well. He hired a part-time hand to help with the heavier work, a young man named Tom from a neighboring ranch, which gave him more time to spend with his family. On their second anniversary, Zachary gave Flora a gift he had been planning for months, a small music room addition he had built onto the house. It was not large, just enough space for her piano and a comfortable chair, with windows overlooking the meadow where he had first heard her sing. Flora cried when she saw it, throwing her arms around him. "You gave me a room just for music," she said, voice muffled against his chest. "You deserve to have space for the things you love," Zachary replied. "And I love hearing you play and sing. I want you to have somewhere special to do it." That evening, after Benjamin was asleep, Flora played for him, her fingers moving over the keys with confidence and joy. When she began to sing, her voice filling the small room and spilling out into the warm May evening, Zachary closed his eyes and remembered that first day, following her voice through the meadow, not knowing his entire life was about to change. "What are you thinking about?" Flora asked when the song ended. "About how lucky I am," Zachary said simply. "About how hearing you sing that day was the best thing that ever happened to me." Flora left the piano bench and came to sit beside him, tucking herself against his side. "I think about that day too. How I almost did not go to the meadow that afternoon because I had so many chores to finish. What would have happened if I had stayed home?" "I would have found you eventually," Zachary said with certainty. "Maybe it would have taken longer, but I believe we were meant to find each other." "So do I," Flora said softly. "So do I." The years passed in a rhythm of work and love and growing family. Benjamin grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, trying to help with chores in ways that were more hindrance than help, but that Zachary treasured anyway. When Benjamin was 3, Flora gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Marie. She had Flora's dark eyes and Zachary's lighter hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father completely wrapped around her tiny finger. 2 years after Rose came another son, James Daniel, named for Zachary's father and for Dan McCready, who had become like a father figure to him. James was quieter than his older siblings, content to watch and observe rather than constantly demanding attention. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Zachary bought more land, hired more hands, built his herd until he had over 100 head of cattle. He became known in the area as a fair employer and a skilled rancher, someone whose word could be trusted. Flora became involved in the community as well, organizing social events at the church, teaching music to children in town, helping neighbors when sickness or hardship struck. Francis remained a constant presence in their lives until he passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, 14 years after Zachary and Flora first met. His death hit Flora hard, but she found comfort in knowing he had lived to see his grandchildren growing up happy and healthy, had seen the success of the ranch and the strength of her marriage. They buried him next to his wife in the Oroville cemetery, and Flora sang at the service, her voice breaking but never failing entirely. "He was so proud of you. Zachary told her that night as they lay in bed, holding each other. "He told me once that seeing you happy made everything worthwhile." "I was happy because of you," Flora said, "because you loved me enough to work for our future, because you never gave up even when it was hard." "I would do it all again," Zachary said. "Every moment of it." As their children grew into teenagers and young adults, Zachary and Flora watched with pride as Benjamin showed aptitude for ranching and eagerness to take over the family business. Rose developed her mother's musical talent, with a voice even more beautiful if that was possible, and talked about studying music seriously. James surprised everyone by showing an interest in medicine after helping the local doctor treat an injured ranch hand, and declared his intention to go to medical school. "We raised them well," Flora said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 40s now, both showing some gray in their hair, lines around their eyes from years of sun, and smiling. "They are good people, all three of them." "They are," Zachary agreed, reaching over to take her hand. "We have been blessed, Flora, more than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever think about that day in the meadow?" Flora asked. "About what our lives would have been if you had not followed my voice?" "Sometimes," Zachary admitted, "but I cannot imagine it really. You and our children, this ranch, this life, it all feels like it was always meant to be." Flora squeezed his hand, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Sing with me," she asked. "You know I cannot carry a tune to save my life," Zachary protested, but he was smiling. "I do not care. I want to hear your voice mixed with mine." So they sang together, off-key and imperfect and absolutely beautiful, while the sun set over the land they had built together through love and work and faith in each other. The years continued their steady march forward. Benjamin married a sweet woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Zachary and Flora their first grandchildren, twin boys who were absolute terrors and utterly delightful. Rose studied music in San Francisco, but always came home for holidays, filling the house with song and laughter. James went to medical school as planned and eventually returned to Oroville to practice, taking over when the old doctor retired. Zachary and Flora grew older together, their hair turning fully white, their bodies slower but their love as strong as ever. They celebrated their 35th anniversary in 1913, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and Zachary stood to make a toast. "35 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I heard the most beautiful sound I had ever experienced. A voice singing in a meadow, pure and haunting and impossible to resist. I followed that voice and found not just a woman but my entire future, everything good and worthwhile in my life. Flora, you have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me children and grandchildren. You have built a home with me. You have made every day an adventure worth living. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I will love you until I take my last breath." Flora was crying openly now, as were several of their children and grandchildren. She stood and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "You followed my voice," she said softly, "but you gave me everything. You gave me a home, a family, a life full of love and meaning. You have been the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known. I love you, Zachary Owens, with all my heart and soul." They kissed, long and sweet, while their family applauded and wiped away tears. And later that evening, when everyone had gone home and they sat together on their porch in the twilight, Flora began to sing the same song she had been singing that day in the meadow all those years ago. Her voice was older now, not as powerful as it once was, but still beautiful, still filled with emotion and meaning. Zachary listened with his eyes closed, transported back to that moment when he was 26 and alone, and had no idea his whole world was about to change. He thought about the boy he had been and the man he had become, and he knew with absolute certainty that every choice he had made, every risk he had taken, every moment of hard work and struggle had been worth it, because he had followed that voice in the meadow and found the woman of his dreams. When Flora finished singing, he opened his eyes and looked at her, this woman who had shared his life for over 3 decades, who had given him everything worth having. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Flora asked. "For singing that day, for letting me find you, for choosing me." Zachary pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "For every moment we have shared." "I would do it all again, too," Flora whispered against his shoulder. "Every single moment." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched them fall in love all those years ago, still shining steadily on. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, the horses dozing in the barn. Inside the house, the piano sat silent in its special room, waiting for morning when Flora would play again. In town, their children lived their own lives, building their own futures. And here, on this porch, in this place they had built together, Zachary and Flora held each other and were completely, perfectly content. Life had been hard at times. The West was not forgiving to anyone. They had faced droughts and harsh winters, lean years when money was tight, illness that struck their children and made them fear the worst. But they had faced it all together, drawing strength from each other, never giving up, always moving forward. And the joy had far outweighed the struggle. The joy of watching their children grow, of building something lasting, of waking up every morning next to the person they loved most in the world, as they grew even older, into their 60s and then 70s. They slowed down but never stopped entirely. Benjamin ran the ranch now with his sons helping, but Zachary still went out most days to check on things, to offer advice, to feel useful. Flora still played her piano, still sang, though her voice grew thinner with age. They still took walks together when the weather was nice, still held hands like young lovers, still found reasons to laugh together every single day. On a warm afternoon in the spring of 1923, 45 years after they first met, Zachary and Flora rode out together to the meadow where it had all begun. It took them longer to get there now, and mounting and dismounting required more care, but they made it. The meadow looked much the same as it had all those years ago, though the trees were taller and some of the wildflowers had changed. They stood together in the middle of it, in the exact spot where Zachary had first seen Flora singing. "Do you remember how frightened I was when I opened my eyes and saw you watching me?" Flora asked, smiling at the memory. "You did not look frightened," Zachary said. "You looked curious and beautiful, so beautiful it hurt to look at you." "Flatterer," Flora accused, but she was pleased. "It is not flattery if it is true. You are still beautiful, Flora. You always will be to me." Flora turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his weathered face, tracing the lines that time and sun had carved there. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Zachary confirmed. "Better than anything I could have imagined that day when I heard you singing." "Sing with me now," Flora asked. "Like we used to, always," Zachary said. So they sang together in the meadow, their voices old and not always hitting the right notes, but filled with love and memory and gratitude for all they had shared. The wind carried their song across the hills, across the ranch that had been built on hard work and hope, across the town where their children and grandchildren lived and thrived. And if anyone had been there to hear it, they would have heard not just two old people singing, but the echo of a love story that had spanned nearly half a century, a testament to the power of following your heart even when you did not know where it would lead. When the song ended, They stood quietly for a moment, just breathing in the afternoon air, feeling the sun on their faces. Then Zachary took Flora's hand and they walked slowly back to their horses, back toward home and family, and the life they had built together one day at a time. Years later, long after both of them had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story of how they met. About the cowboy who heard a woman singing in a meadow and followed the voice to find the love of his life. About the couple who built a ranch and raised a family and loved each other faithfully through 47 years of marriage. About two people who proved that sometimes the best things in life come when you are brave enough to follow a beautiful sound into the unknown. And on quiet spring afternoons, if you stood very still in that meadow near Oroville, some people swore you could still hear the echo of Flora's voice singing, pure and haunting and full of love, carried on the wind like a promise that true love never really dies. It just transforms into memory and story and inspiration for all who come after. The Richardson Owens Ranch still operates today, run by the descendants of Zachary and Flora, who remember their great-great-grandparents with pride and affection. In the family home, carefully preserved, sits Flora's piano, still played on special occasions. And above the fireplace hangs a painting done from an old photograph, showing a young cowboy and a beautiful young woman standing together in a flower-filled meadow, looking at each other like they held the whole world in their hands, because, in all the ways that mattered, they did.